Alright, ladies and gentlemen, in this video we are going to focus on our success criteria, which is to be able to use the distance formula to find any distance in a coordinate plane. So, distance formula, again, this should not be new to us. If you are in geometry, that means you have gone through Algebra 1 and some of the basics of pre-algebra, but we should know the distance formula. Let's review it just in case. The distance formula, the distance between any 2 points in a coordinate plane can be found by taking the square root of x2 minus x1 quantity squared plus y2 minus y1 quantity squared. Well, where does this actually come from? Well, if I have a random point A right here, and if I have its x value to be x1, and if I have its y value to be y1, I also have a random point B right here. We'll call this x2 and we'll call this y2. If I want to find the distance between these 2 points, I can take x2 minus x1 squared, y2 minus y1 squared, and add them together and take the square root. Now I have a question for you. Does it matter if I go x1 minus x2 or x2 minus x1? Hopefully we realize that it does not matter, because when you square the quantities, it will not change because it will make it positive. But what you do have to make sure is that you stay consistent. If you do x2 minus x1 first, you got to do y2 minus y1 first. x1 minus x2 first, then do y1 minus y2 first. I think that keeps the consistency, and it makes especially any possible errors from happening. So let's take a look at an example of how we can use the distance formula. There's so many, a variety of different ways in which it can be used, but let's just take a look at one real quick. So it says your school is 4 miles east and 1 mile south of your apartment. A recycling center where your class is going on a field trip is 2 miles east and 3 miles north of your apartment. Estimate the distance between the recycling center and your school. Well, the question that we have is, what are these? These aren't coordinates, right? All they are directions. Or are they? What would represent your apartment? Well, your apartment is your starting point. And when we think of a coordinate plane, the starting point is the origin. So technically, we do have coordinates. So if my starting point is my apartment right here, and your school is 4 miles east, all right? So never eat soggy waffles, all right? So 4 miles east and 1 mile south. So 1, 2, 3, 4 east and 1 south. That puts the school at 4, comma, -1. A recycling center where your class is going on a field trip is 2 miles east and 3 miles north of your apartment. So 1, 2, and 1, 2, 3 north. So that's going to be at 2, comma, 3. Estimate the distance between the recycling center and your school. So I'm going to go ahead and put, in this case, R for recycling center and S for school. So the distance from R to S is equal to the square root of x2 minus x1 squared. So if I'm going to go ahead and I'll call this x2 and I'll call this y2 and I'll call this x1 and I'll call this y1. And again, I could have switched those. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to have 4 minus 2 squared plus -1 minus 3 squared. So I get 4 minus 2 is 2 squared plus -1 minus a -3 is a -4 squared. 2 squared is 4. And 4 squared is 16. So my distance is the square root of 20. But we're going to try to simplify that. So if you remember correctly, we simplify radicals by finding the highest perfect square factor. So I'm going to take this up here, and just so we know what we're talking about, remember the square root of 20 can be said that it's the square root of 4 times 5. Why did I choose 4 and 5? Because 4 is the highest perfect square factor, so I can take the square root of 4 and I can finish off by saying that the answer is 2 root 5. And if you don't believe me, do square root of 20 on your calculator and then do square root of 5 times 2. You will get the same answer in the end.